welcome back to DH Deck Building. I'm your host Demo, and this is my Vega the Watcher deck tech. Before I get to the deck tech though, I want to talk briefly about power level and difficulty level. I've started adding these to my deck techs just to give people a general idea of what I think the power level is and what I think the difficulty level is. I mean, the power level thing is self-explanatory for the most part. I think people generally understand the 1 to 10 scale of power level in Commander. Typically 9 and 10s are considered CEDH or competitive power level. 8, 7 is about as powerful as you want to get with a casual deck. Most of my decks, I'd say, are probably a 7, 6, probably 6 or 7. You know, like I said, most of my decks I'd like to actually win with. Winning is kind of fun for me. But I wouldn't put any of my decks at an 8 just because there are a lot of cards that I avoid. You know, I don't play Rhystic Study. I don't play Force of Will or Necropotence. Mana Crypt, some of these cards that some people consider to be maybe more competitive. So I stay away from cards like that. So for that reason, really none of my decks could ever be more than a 7 just because of the cards that I avoid playing. And then difficulty level, I put this in here because some of my decks are really difficult to play. They're complex and you need a high level. So it's a combination of your skill as a Magic player and understanding the nuances of the game and how the stack works and all that. But it's also like this deck. The difficulty level on my Vega deck will be high, not necessarily because of the complexity of the rules you need to know, but because there's a lot of different things going on, right? We have Suspend in this deck, we have FORETELL in this deck, we have Adventure in this deck, Flashback in this deck. So there's just a lot of things going on all at once that you really have to keep track of. So it's not a deck you want to play if you are, if your mind is wandering or on something else. It's a deck, even though it is a very casual deck, it's a deck that you really want to be concentrating on what's happening because there's just a lot of different things going on all at once. So what are we doing? Obviously, Vega wants us to be casting spells from anywhere other than our hand. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, right? So probably the most obvious way is Flashback. We have Divine Reckoning. It's a good board wipe. And also we want our commander to be on the battlefield as much as possible. So it works for us. Also has Flashback. Deep Analysis is a good one. The Flashback is even cheaper than the original cost, which is good. I like Mass Diminish. We are playing a controlling style, and any card that can slow our opponents down and keep them off of us is good. I also have Savine's Reclamation, just a great card. We're going to be getting things out of our graveyard a lot, so this is going to be good for that. I also have Escape, Sleep of the Dead, and Sentinel's Eyes. These guys are cheap. They're going to fit in with the strategy of what we're doing. So already you're seeing why the difficulty level is high in this deck, because we have to be paying attention to what's in our graveyard, right? A lot of people will just cast spells and then they'll forget they're in their graveyard and not even think about it. So we want to be remembering in the back of our head, constantly shuffling through our graveyard to see if there's things we can escape or flash back. We also got Rebound, right? Rebound is going to be casting spells from somewhere other than our hand. Obviously, the first time we cast it, it won't be, but then it will exile itself, and it will be cast from exile, so that's going to draw us a card. I have Emergence, Unscathed, and Ojutai's Breath. Again, just cards that are, relatively inexpensive. Emergence Unscathed is just going to protect us, typically our commander, from dying, because we want to keep him on the table. Ojutai's Breath, just going to tap down a creature. So your opponent's got a big creature. We tap it down, and it doesn't untap during the next untap step. Then it rebounds, and we can do it again. So we can keep an opponent's a big threat tapped down for quite some time with that card. So I like that a lot. We also have Adventure, right? Because Adventure is going to be casting spells from exile. So Queen of Ice and Brazen Borer, 2 cards that are just going to be good. Again, sort of controlling cards that are going to be slowing our opponents down, keeping them off of us. Also having Hypnotic Sprite, again, another card that fits in a controlling style. And Giant Killer, another card that I think is going to work well in this deck. Obviously, Suspend is going to work in this deck as well. So I have Deep Sea Kraken. He's a card that we're just going to throw it in exile, and when we get it, we get it. And when it casts, we get to draw a card. I have Chronomatic Escape and Reality Strobe. Both of these guys are repeating effects, which I really, really like. We're going to stick them in exile, and they're going to just keep casting themselves and then going back to exile, and then casting themselves and then going back to exile. And so we just stick them there, right? And we, again, this is really adds to the difficulty level, because we want to pay attention to when these cards are going off, right? So for example, I'm going to, if I know my Chronomatic Escape is going to go off next turn, maybe I won't do a whole lot of stuff. So the turn that my Chronomatic Escape casts itself, so now my opponents can't attack me, that's probably the turn that I'm going to tap out and do a whole bunch of stuff, because I know my opponents aren't going to attack me anyway, right? If I'm thinking of board wiping, I'll wait until my Chronomatic Escape goes off. Then after it goes off, the next turn, that's when I'll board wipe, right? Because now my opponents can attack me again. Apocryphite is another one. This is a card that's just going to keep recasting itself. We're just going to chump with it, right? We're just going to put it in play. Someone attacks us, we throw it in the way, and we want it to die so that it can go into exile and start suspending and start drawing us cards. It's just going to keep doing it over and over and over again. Again, we're so much going on all at once. We got cards on an adventure. We got cards suspended. We got cards in our graveyard with flashback and escape. And we also have FORETELL cards, which of course is what I think this deck originally was supposed to be for. And I have gushed over the FORETELL cards quite a bit because so many of them are great. Spectral Deluge and Stoic Farmer are auto includes in both mono blue and mono white decks, I think, and both in AZORIUS decks as well. They're fantastic. When we cast them, and these cards, it's not like the Suspend or the where we have to, we don't have any control over when we cast them. We're just going to cast, we're going to stick them in exile and cast them at our leisure, like whenever it's convenient for us. I really like Glorious Protector, another one of these FORETELL cards that I had in my top 20 Kaldheim cards. I think out of the 20, I had about 5 or 6 that were FORETELL. I really like the FORETELL mechanic in Commander. I have other, I'm not even going to mention all the FORETELL cards. I got about 7 or 8 in this deck. This is a great deck to be sticking them in because they're just good cards anyway. And then also we get to draw a card off of them when we cast them, right? So you can sort of see about the complexities of this deck, right? About how we have so much stuff going on. Nothing is really confusing. There's not a lot of, intricacies of the mechanics of the game that you have to worry about. It's just, I'm going to be sitting here on my turn and I'm going to have FORETELL stuff sitting in exile. I'm going to have Suspend stuff sitting in exile, all at the same time that I all need to be paying attention to. I'm going to have cards that might be rebounding that I should be aware of. I have cards that are in my graveyard that have flashback or escape that I need to be aware of. There's just so many things going on all at once. That's why this deck can be really difficult to play, but I love it. I've played it a few times, and I almost wasn't going to make this deck because I wanted to make a Raynar deck, and I thought this was just too familiar to Raynar, but it's really not. I made this deck first. I made it right away as soon as I saw Vega because I was excited about it, and AZORIUS hasn't had a good commander in a long time. I think Brago is still the #1 AZORIUS commander, and he's like 5 years old. So I was so excited to have these new AZORIUS commanders, and then Raynar got spoiled, and I was like, oh man, he's even better, I think. So I made that deck after, and I really liked it a lot, and I did the deck tech first, but then I started playing this Vega deck, and I really liked it. I liked the complexity of it. For me, I like that. I like when there's a lot of stuff going on. It can be tough to keep track of all of it. A few other things that we're doing in this deck, I put Taigam in this deck. I mean, first of all, our instants and sorceries can't be countered. That's just a good ability to have. But also, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell from our hand, if he has attacked, it gets rebound. So now we can give rebound to our other spells. So I think he fits really good in this deck. I also have Precognition Field because it allows us to cast stuff from the top of our library, which is going to draw us a card. We're not casting stuff from our hand. So we can cast our instants and sorcery spells from the top of our library, which I really like. There are a lot of other cards that you could do with this. You could put Future Sight and stuff like that in this deck. I didn't do that. I didn't go too much down that road. There were so many other things we're doing in this deck. I didn't want to go too much with that. I also don't like revealing the top card of my library. I've talked about this in other videos where showing all my opponents what I have on top of my library, what I'm going to be drawing next, is a bad strategy. So that's why I like Precognition Field, because you're just looking at the top card of your library. You don't have to reveal it. Chaos Wand. This is a really interesting one. People were playing this card quite a bit in Commander when it first came out, and I haven't really seen it much lately. This is going to be casting a spell not from our hand. We're going to be exiling cards from an opponent's library until we get an instant or sorcery, and then we're going to cast it without paying its mana cost. This can be really good. It's random, which I don't love, right? I mean, the name says it all, Chaos Wand, right? I don't love the randomness. I don't love that, but it's going to draw us a card, right? Even if we get a terrible spell that we don't want, even if we get a Sky Shroud claim off the top, which we can cast it. We're not going to get any force out of our decks. We don't have any, but at least we can cast it and draw a card. So we're guaranteed to get that draw at the very least. So I think it fits in this deck really good. And then we're going to close things out with cards like Cast Through Time. This is a really powerful effect. So all of our spells are going to get, not all of our spells, just our instants and sorceries, but that's a lot. We only have 16 creatures in this deck. So the majority of this deck is instant and sorcery spells, like most Azorius decks. So this is going to get us so much value. It's going to draw us a ton of cards. It's going to be really difficult for our opponents to keep up. And then Amanatu's Augury. This is a card that right out of the gate, I tried to put in as many decks as I could because I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was very interesting and unique. Not a lot of cards do this, but it's fantastic in this deck because we can get like 3 or 4 of those cast triggers, right? We're going to exile the top 8 cards, play a land, so we get an extra land drop, and then you can get really bad luck with this sometimes. But if we can cast an enchantment and an artifact and an instant and a sorcery, and a creature, that's 5 card draws we're going to get off of that. That's so much value. Obviously, I'm going to put Thought Vessel in this deck and Reliquary Tower. These are cards that, most often get played a lot, probably too much in Commander. But in this deck, in any deck where I'm drawing cards, obviously that, I don't want to draw 5 or 6 cards and then have to discard a bunch. So those cards are going to be great in this deck. And then the rest of the deck is mostly, your typical Azorius style of control. We're going to have a lot of cards that are going to be keeping people off of us because I just think that you can be a target. When I talked about Azorius not having a lot of new commanders for a long, long time, that is one of the reasons why Azorius is the least popular 2-color combination in the format. That's right, it's not Boros. EDH Recast just did a podcast about this a little while ago. The least popular 2-color combination is Azorius, which probably would surprise a lot of people. And the reason I think partly is because there hasn't been a lot of new commanders in Azorius lately, but another one of the reasons is because I think Azorius draws a lot of hate simply because when people see a blue-white deck, they're like, oh, he's playing a control deck. He's going to counter everything I play. He's going to remove everything I put on the battlefield. And maybe there's a little bit of truth to that, but I think that's the reason why maybe Azorius garners a little bit more hate than they deserve. I like it personally. White is one of my favorite colors, and Azorius is one of the first color combinations I played when I first started playing Magic. So I guess I have a little bit of nostalgia there. This deck is tons of fun, though. I really like it a lot. It can get a little hectic with all the things going on at once. But if you like that kind of thing, if you like a deck that's going to keep you on your toes and isn't boring and isn't one-dimensional, this is it. So that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in.